morning, friends. I'm Ani Agnihotri. I'm co-founder and chairman of Marshall Automation America, as well as co-founder of Global USA Business Forum and USA India Business Summit. It is my honor and privilege to welcome all of you. We have been working with Georgia Tech Cyber for the last 12 years. This is our 12th annual program. And we want to thank your participation and support to all the sponsors. You are seeing their name on the top of the screen here. Georgia Tech Cyber, Global USA Business Forum, Georgia Department of Economic Development, Novelis Group, Equinix, Southern Company, Georgia Pacific, Forward Foresight, USC Aiken, Gopre Law Firm, Turkish Airlines, Consulates of Canada and India, Metro Atlanta Chamber of Commerce, Connex, Next Generation, Georgia Minority Supplier Development Council, Marshall Automation, and Manchester Trade. We also media partners at the bottom of the screen. With this, I would like to invite co-chair of Georgia Tech Global Business Forum, Dr. John McIntyre. John.
Thank you, Annie, and good morning on this second day from, again, a bright and sunny day to welcome our guest speaker this morning. I'm John McIntyre, a professor in the business school at Georgia Tech, the Scheller College of Business, with an appointment also in the Sam Nunn School of International Affairs. It's a pleasure to greet you this morning and to introduce my colleague, Professor Philip Shapira. I'm going to say a few words about him. He joins us from Manchester in the United Kingdom, and I'm told that it's slightly drizzly and perhaps there is evidence of rain there, which really surprises me, I must say. But Phil is a professor in the School of Public Policy at Georgia Tech, one of the jewels of our institution, with incredible founts of scholarship and knowledge about the topic we are going to be addressing today. He's also a professor of management, innovation, and policy with the Manchester Institute of Innovation Research in the Alliance Manchester Business School, which is the largest business school in the United Kingdom. His interests are many, but he is one of the distinguished experts in the United States on science and technology policy and regional economic development, with emphasis on innovation and management policy. At Georgia Tech, he is director of the Georgia Tech program in science, technology, and innovation policy, and also co-director of the Georgia Manufacturing Survey. He is the author of numerous publications. One of them, well known, is the Handbook of Innovation Policy and Impact, and another, the Handbook of Innovation Policy Theory and Practice, an international handbook. He is a distinguished fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science and also a fellow of the Royal Society of the Arts. And I was basically commiserating with him because he is really a bicontinental professor, traveling back and forth between Manchester and Atlanta, Georgia, commiserating about the fact that as travel resumes post-COVID, fares, transcontinental travel fares have increased by a factor of 2. So we're delighted to greet him today to tell us about innovation missions and cities in the post-pandemic, challenges and opportunities for innovation districts. Phil, welcome, and the floor is yours.
So thank you very much, John, for that generous introduction. And it's been a pleasure to work with you over the years and to talk at this conference. And thank you also, Annie, for your assistance and engagement. So I want to talk today about innovation, missions, and cities in the post-pandemic, and particularly focus on a particular intervention in the city, which is known as an innovation district. And I'll explain what innovation districts are shortly. I'll talk about their dynamics through to the early 2020, before the pandemic, what's happened during the pandemic, and then talk about some of the challenges and issues that they raise. And I think we'll see that although the focus is on innovation districts, which are subsets of larger urban metropolitan areas, they really raise all the issues about equity, innovation, sustainability that we had before the pandemic, maybe have been intensified during the pandemic, and are issues that those involved in cities, which is really the majority of the world's population, whether they're in government, in business, academia, or nonprofits, have to kind of work through. Well, what is an innovation district? So I'll just give a couple of definitions. There's one put forward by the Brookings Institution, which essentially says it's a geographical area which clusters leading edge institutions with business to promote innovation and physically and digitally well connected. The particular definition that I like is one that's coming from RTI, which is a Research Triangle Institute in North Carolina, that essentially starts with the notion of an innovation ecosystem. So this is the set of relationships, actors, networks, whereby we create value in the economy and in the society. And in order to make an innovation ecosystem work, we need lots of connections and interactions, and the chart shows the various kinds of actors, whether it's, of course, companies, universities, other organizations involved in making an innovation ecosystem work. And an innovation district, in a way, is a localized hub of an innovation ecosystem. And I like this kind of a definition because it makes it clear that the innovation district, the particular areas that we're concerned about, are connected, with the broader national and global economy, and those connections are particularly important, particularly the global connections. So here's an example. If we were meeting today in Atlanta, as opposed to having this online conference, I'm sure we would be either in the Global Learning Center or perhaps in the business school, which is right in the center of Midtown Atlanta. And we would find ourselves, particularly as we looked around, in a thriving and active domain of research facilities, companies, large companies, small companies, retail, residential, pedestrians, bikes, traffic. I mean, it's busy, and it's increasingly emerged as an innovative hub within the metropolitan Atlanta region. Now, if we had been there, and you can see a little picture of it down there on the just on the right-hand side, if we had been on the same spot 20 or 30 years ago, we would have found many parking lots, some disused buildings, and nothing near the level of activity that you see now. And what has happened in this intervening 20 years has been a combined effort of public and private actors, essentially to reshape this part of Midtown Atlanta into a different kind of a location. So it begins with Georgia Tech acquiring land and beginning to develop plans for something called Technology Square or Tech Square, with research facilities, incubator facilities, hotel, new business school, widening of the bridges. So this was like the public infrastructure investment. And around this was a set of private developers that also began to be leveraged from this. So after about 10 years, by 2012, there had been the growth of innovation centers and labs in Tech Square. And since then, a very large number of new apartment units have been built in and around this particular locality. It's said that there are now 6,000 tech-related jobs, a number of really big companies, Equifax, AT&T, that perhaps were there before, but have embedded themselves, and some new ones, particularly NCR, Google, Microsoft kind of coming in. Lots of SMEs, startups, workspaces, institutional thickening with other universities being involved. One of the important things is it's not just a work location, it's a live, work, play kind of a location. So there are people that live in and around the Midtown, predominantly younger residents, well-educated, well-connected with transportation. And the governance of this is essentially through something called the Midtown Alliance, which is a non-profit combination of developers, universities, representatives from finance, community in the city. They do have a mechanism to get a tax increment from development, which helps fund for internal improvement, and the ongoing role of Georgia Tech as an anchor institution. So this is an example. For those in Atlanta, I'm sure you know it well. For those who visit Atlanta, you will visit it and kind of see the development has taken on there. This is one of many innovation districts which have emerged around the world. It's said in the scholarly accounts that perhaps the first one was in Barcelona, where one of the older industrial areas in the central city was revived, and the thoughts of revival began with the Olympics in Barcelona. There was transportation improvements, but it really began to take off with a plan around the year 2000 to build a kind of a new compact city that became known as an innovation district. And today in this part of Barcelona, thousands of new companies, mostly small ones, jobs, new housing units, and governance through a non-profit association. We can look at perhaps older examples, Kendall Square in MIT, which I know I was a student there at an earlier time. And I think at that time, it was predominantly a large R&D location, but in recent years, it's really transformed to be much more of a dynamic startup mixed-use environment. And to them, aware of efforts in Manchester. It's said that perhaps there are 80 of these innovation districts worldwide. We don't really know. Another estimate says maybe 90 in the US alone. Another study identifies more than 500 places. This is larger than innovation districts, but includes innovation corridors, innovation club hubs, anywhere where there's an effort to designate a particular location as a hub for innovation. And there's particular growth of these in Asia, in Africa and Latin America, in addition to Europe and North America. A typology which the Brookings Institution have put forward are three kinds of innovation districts. One where there's a kind of a model of an anchor, such as Georgia Tech or MIT or the University of Manchester. A second case, which is more like Barcelona, you'll also see this in Boston at the seaport, which is an older urban area which has been reimagined. And then we also see the development of urbanized science parks. And here the model of the Research Triangle Park, which began as a research park, but has now become a much more integrated live, work, play kind of a location. Well, I'm an academic, and of course, academics like to say there's nothing really new, but there are always new variations. And I think actually those new variations, those innovations are always really important. But we can go back to the work of Alfred Marshall, who was an English economist writing about Manchester and Sheffield and Birmingham in the industrial era, talking about the importance of location, of proximity. And where business clusters together, you get knowledge exchange, particularly informal knowledge exchange, the development of specialties, pools of labor, which can really accelerate and speed up the innovation process. In a way, Silicon Valley is a large, more recent model of this kind of an agglomeration. But we could think of Silicon Valley which began, in its present form in the 70s and 80s, as a kind of a greenfield high tech, because it essentially expanded out into the orchards of around San Jose and to the south of Stanford. kind of continuing this notion of suburbanization. But maybe the important turn here in thinking about how we do innovation today was the rediscovery of the city as the driver of urban wealth. And it begins with work by Jane Jacobs, who talks about the intrinsic role of cities as the drivers of wealth in nations. And when cities develop and grow, nations develop and grow. And complemented by work on innovation clusters by Peoria and Sable at MIT, Robert Putnam's work on the importance of social capital and interactions in the making of places, and Richard Florida's work on the creative class, where he kind of looked at the growth of places like Atlanta and Pittsburgh and other locations in the city, and highlighted the importance of the 3 T's: technology, talent, and tolerance. And this kind of then takes us to the present period with the conceptualization of innovation districts in Barcelona, the work by Brookins, by Katz and Wagner, which is very much associated with this, and the formation of organizations such as the Global Institute on Innovation Districts or the UK Innovation Districts Group to kind of promote and further develop this concept. Next slide, please. So the drivers of IDs, innovation districts, these are kind of commonly cited in the literature, a combination of firms, anchor research institutions, intermediaries, place qualities, but also public-private leadership, and the partnerships with developers, finance, the role of talent, and this kind of integration of work and play. And in other ways of looking at this, there's also a process, because these places, in some cases, places have developed as innovation districts and then they're renamed as such subsequently. You might think of Kendall Square as a place like this, or they begin by scratch. The second chart, which is coming from some work by Arthur D. Little, I think thoughtfully emphasizes the importance of planning and visioning and partnership building, that whole process of beginning maybe with ideas and kind of turning that into the tangible realities of an active innovation district. So the benefits typically anticipated from innovation districts for global businesses, for large businesses, the companies like Google or Samsung or Panasonic or Microsoft that have come to Atlanta. They're looking for access to talent. They want the knowledge that is emerging in those innovation districts, as well as places like Georgia Tech and other research universities. They want networks, but very importantly, they want to be in places where their employees of today want to live. And I think increasingly employees don't necessarily want to live in a kind of long commuting, suburban industrial park kind of existence, but increasing numbers of them, particularly younger employees, want to live in the city and kind of live and work and play close together. So these are places where people want to live. There are advantages to startups in terms of the startup space, the networking, finance. Universities can leverage their R&D, technology transfer, spin-offs, opportunities for students. Of course, acquire buildings. It's always of interest to universities and enhance their reputation. Developers like the innovation district concept because it kind of concentrates demand for first-class office space, for residential, for retail, and helps build the case not only for new build, but for restoring older historic buildings. And city governments like innovation districts because there are ways in which they can try and revitalize areas and generate revenues. That said, so I'm giving you the plus side. Well, there's also some issues and challenges facing innovation districts. And we knew these are not new. We knew these before the pandemic. And this was kind of the discussion, through to about March of 2020. there were concerns of the kind of the unequal distribution of benefits, that these districts attract and cater for well-educated younger people who work in well-resourced global M&As or well-financed high-tech startups. That's a very small fraction of the population of the city. How do other people benefit from innovation districts? Are they just about building buildings? Of course, developers like to build buildings, and if they're not successful, they'll go bankrupt. But are we also building communities? And is the focus in innovation districts, again, become unbalanced? So if you wanted to live in or around an innovation district, you'll find you can rent a fairly well-priced studio, 1-bedroom or 2-bedroom, maybe buy a condo. There's very little high-quality multifamily housing or families for housing for low income. That's just not what developers can find market to build. And those innovation districts have impacts on surrounding neighborhoods in central cities. We find the issue of gentrification, the displacement of existing neighbors who can no longer can afford that housing. There are issues of the spillovers to the rest of the metropolitan region. Okay, you can build an island or 1 or 2 islands of excellence, but how do you regenerate a much larger region? If you depend on cars, how sustainable is this approach? And you'll find particularly in US innovation districts, the first thing that gets built is the big car park. And then around that, the retail development or the housing development or the incubator. Is this really a sustainable model? Is the innovation that's being developed in these areas the same as economic and social benefit? Who controls? And then another kind of an issue, will the popularity of innovation districts kind of dilute the brand? I mean, there are no standards for innovation districts. Anyone can designate one. What does it mean? And when we have so many, it kind of dilutes their effectiveness. So lots of issues around innovation districts. Next slide, please. I think we have to put these issues, they're not created per se by innovation districts because they kind of they occur in the context of what has been happening to cities anyway. And if I see, Annie, that we're using a PDF version, if we had used the PPT version, there's actually a graph here that moves that shows the widening inequality that this is the graph for 1980 of income inequality by size of city. And if we look at 2025, it's just enormously grown. So we have had decades of rising income inequality in US cities. We see this in cities around the world. A new crisis of a new urban crisis is Richard Florida's latest book about inequity and segregation in cities. And at the other side of the coin is, the 1% issue, that a relatively small proportion of the urban elite are essentially gaining the benefits, and they're opportunity hoarding. So not only do higher income, this is a US case, but it occurs in other locations, not only do higher income households benefit from opportunities today, but they can pass them on to their children through access to school and university and helping them finance their business and other things. So it kind of perpetuates the inequities we have. So this is the broader context. Next slide, please. Well, okay, so along comes COVID, in 2020, March 2020. And I think we've all been through this. I won't belabor it, but essentially, because it does vary by country. but in many countries, just for a period, has caused lockdown and then partial lockdowns, working from home, business travel cancelled, spending in the city down. Of course, the rise of Zoom, some movement out from cities to smaller towns, the rise of the digital nomad, hiring freezes, fewer internships, etc. So there's been a whole package of issues that have kind of come along to cities, particularly to central cities during the COVID situation. Next slide. Well, hopefully, if we're not in the post-pandemic, we're going through it, and so we can begin to talk about the post-COVID city and what we've learned from the pandemic and how this might relate to innovation districts. Well, we've actually learned that working from home works, but it works for well-educated knowledge workers. And even then, there's beginning to be issues about, well, does it really work for creativity and for team projects? And we still need face-to-face. And so I think many of us have moved to a hybrid working situation where we go in to work for part of the week and work from home in other parts of the week. These kinds of situations favor some, particularly younger knowledge workers. They're more difficult for people with caring responsibilities, perhaps also for women that often have to do much of the caring. There's discussion on urban house prices will fall in the city. Well, actually, it seems urban house prices are rising again. We should reshape the city. And so there was the growth of bikeways and outdoor space during the pandemic. In a number of cities, there's now been a kickback against that and efforts to kind of retrieve that back for cars. I won't go through all the details here, but the point is that we're now having a debate about what the post-COVID city should look like, how we deal with the fear of interaction that might still be there, at least for a period of time, by demographics, the importance of urban community, and some new ideas. For example, in Paris, the idea of essentially the 15-minute city, that people can live, work, play, and pretty much their life can be done in a 15-minute sustainable transportation corridor. And how can we begin to replan cities to kind of move to that kind of more sustainable situation. Next slide, please. So coming back to innovation districts, I think there are two key questions. Maybe one is the immediate question about post-pandemic recovery and adjustment. How do we rebuild trust in proximity? The whole point of an innovation district is to bring people together, both formally in offices and informally in coffee places and other public spaces. How can we reconnect people? And I think one idea I see coming up is work on, we had, casual Friday. We don't need casual Friday anymore because we're all casual at home, but maybe work at work Wednesdays, seems to be a mantra that a number of companies are kind of introducing to begin to build back people, but so that everyone is kind of there on a Wednesday. There are obviously a lot of variations on that. I think we're in a moment where we still need to be a bit flexible. Again, it depends on the country and the location, but I think this is a challenge of post-pandemic recovery and adjustment. And we might also reflect in our post-pandemic recovery on some of the learnings from innovation. There are a number of cases of how new ventilators, work on COVID therapies were kind of undertaken in innovation districts around the world, but through rapid engagement of people together, working at speed, working around the clock, really delivering results, breaking down the barriers. And so what can we learn from this crisis period that we can continue, in our subsequent work on innovation? So that's the first question, post-pandemic recovery and adjustment. But I want to finish by focusing on the larger question: how can innovation districts be relevant to this broader mission of social equity, inclusivity, and sustainability at metropolitan and societal scales? Next slide, please. And I think this is something that will need dialogue. I'll be interested in any questions or thoughts. But here are some suggestions. I think there are 4 things or 4 strategic domains to think about: inclusiveness, our business models, sustainability, and governance. But in thinking about how innovation districts can address these broader goals, but at the same time maintain their emphasis on business innovation, I think the importance of training to bring people in, because these places do need well-trained workers, not only knowledge workers with PhDs, but also apprenticeships and other kinds of qualifications. I think the housing mix in and around innovation districts, the public facility mix, really needs attention, and it's really not, I don't think it's really a good social strategy, and maybe not a good economic strategy, just to kind of build, enclaves, gated locations, which are kind of cut off from the rest of the city. We have to find ways to better integrate the varieties of housing and employment in these districts. From a business model perspective, I think there are really important opportunities to think, particularly in lean startup models, about how we can address public value and responsible innovation from the very beginning, as well as addressing market opportunities, and kind of combining these together, and how innovation can better address the many social and community needs that we can identify. In terms of sustainability, to design and retrofit innovation districts to really be more sustainable, both in terms of occupancy and for access and for openness. And in terms of governance, to think about how innovation districts can be more open, how they can involve representation from the communities, particularly those which are around them, which are often low-income communities, how they can involve the various partners within the innovation district. So it's not just a few developers and bankers and university president, but wider sets of stakeholders in these districts, and how the expertise and knowledge and leverage that exists in innovation districts can work with other locations in and around metropolitan areas to help them in their development and innovation strategies, which may or may not be an innovation district, but may look like something else. But we can draw on the capacities that exist in innovation districts to help have metropolitan-wide impact. So the next slide, which is the last slide, is just some concluding thoughts. One is about, I think we're in a post-pandemic dilemma. I think there is a feeling, a sense, a need that we really need to address these societal and sustainability goals, whether we work in business, in academia, in the public sector. But we also have the reality that dependencies and institutional constraints kind of tend to force us back to the old ways, the conventional ways of doing things. So what can we learn from this pandemic and the challenges it's posed to, and the broader global challenges that we face, to really make some changes and not go back to the old normal? And I don't think that's easy. So it's a dilemma, but I think it's one that we have to face probably in all of the things that we're doing. But from an innovation district perspective, how can we re-envision and reposition these instruments so that they can have a much greater mission orientation towards societal and sustainability goals. Just to kind of maybe end on this last quote, the bottom box, I think that innovation districts, can and do have benefits for inclusive growth, but they don't appear by default. We need to kind of find ways through good governance and good design to build them into these strategies. And maybe there's a larger message there for all of our corporate business and social responsibility activities. So thank you, John, on that. I'll conclude, and if there's time, we're pleased to respond to any questions.
Thank you very much, Phil, for a comprehensive, brilliant expose on the nature of innovation districts. I always add the word global to innovation district, which prompts me to ask the first question. Do innovation districts contribute to export performance? Do innovation districts attract foreign direct investment inbound? Which are very salient questions in the case of Georgia, of course.
Yeah, this actually goes back to Jane Jacobs, because one of the key things in her book, The Wealth of Nations, was the way in which innovations create wealth is through export. And the wealthiest cities are the ones that export, whether it's products or knowledge or services or other education. And I think innovation districts are kind of microcosms, that they have to be, that they are generators of export. And so, through products, through innovations, but also through bringing people in that spend money. That's also a kind of a form of this. And and they are very attractive for foreign direct investment. So many innovation districts around the world, have attracted not necessarily the headquarters, right, but an R&D capability. It could be an embedded lab or an R&D unit of a global corporation, because it's an innovation district. They want to be close to the students, the universities, to the other companies. So it's a particular kind of FDI that I think is attracted to an innovation district.
But if you look at the evidence for industrial sidings, manufacturing plants, particularly European firms coming to the United States and other places, they often prefer agrarian and rural settings where there is a workforce that's trainable, perhaps less unionized, rather than really setting up facilities within urban centers close to districts.
Yeah, I mean, we live in a world where different models coexist.
Yes.
I think this is an older model of industrial location, and it may work if you're building a massive car plant, or let's say now a massive battery plant or electric vehicle location. So these new sites have been announced by Ford in particular, and by other companies, tend to be in those locations. But with innovation districts, we're talking about knowledge work. It's not kind of old. It's not even making electric cars, but it might be developing the software, the design, and other kind of really high-end activities. And that kind of R&D and innovation does seem to be advantaged by being in an urban location with lots of knowledge transfer and interaction, and closer to universities.
But can you blame state governments and other units of government for wanting to attract foreign investment that is more, that is productive of large employment, traditional manufacturing operations and the like? Whereas innovation districts would tend to produce or to attract outfits that would not yield very many jobs. This is the dilemma of inclusive growth, isn't it?
Again, I don't think they're mutually exclusive, and probably what state and local industrial and economic developers need to do, and they're probably already doing it, is adding a new dimension onto the things that they're trying to do. But maybe an interesting example, which is from Atlanta, is NCR. So NCR began many years ago with an embedded R&D lab, and they had located an R&D facility very close to Georgia Tech. And subsequently, that has expanded into actually a corporate HQ relocation.
Yes.
You know, in a fantastic new building right in Midtown Atlanta. Sometimes these R&D, particularly for an R&D intensive company, and particularly one that wants to change its orientation, you can actually see that from these small units, R&D units, in some cases it spins off into a much larger investment by the company.
Could you say that there is an agglomeration effect? That is to say, after the creation of lots of R&D operations with knowledge workers, then come the second tier, that is to say, headquarters for Anthem, the technology headquarters for Anthem, or Norfolk Southern in the Atlanta Midtown Innovation District, deciding to set up its operation right there. That it goes beyond really the limited scope effects of just knowledge workers, the 1% dilemma.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you get this kind of positive feedback loops where you see, you know, dynamism and interesting R&D activity, and a nice place to live, and a place where workers would like to associate with. Then it begins to attract companies that come in for other reasons. It also will attract, you know, hotels and restaurants and others. So you begin to get those kind of broader agglomeration and multiplier economies. You know,
what is your sense of the near future of the Atlanta Midtown Innovation District? Do you see some outlines defining itself on the horizon line? More headquarters, growth of corporate innovation centers, or have we reached saturation in that corridor?
I don't think saturation has been reached. You know, we both know Atlanta.
Yes.
There remain there's some space in the Midtown, but actually, if you look at other areas, particularly to the west of Georgia Tech, where there's a whole nother set of districts emerging, there's a lot of older industrial and warehouse space. So I don't think space, and it's brownfield, so it's a bit more expensive to develop. So I think there's some space. I think the issue is about you know, what the future is for this kind of district. In a way, it's proven it can become you know, a good innovation district, but can it become a more equitable and sustainable location? And I do know that in the Midtown area, the Midtown Alliance is improving, you know, bike access and other things, but it's still a very car-focused city. And I think one of the challenges is if you're going to try and remedy things like public transit access, this is a metropolitan-wide challenge. It's not something a small area within a city with a non-governmental association can completely resolve it. And it's basically a, you know, a metropolitan decision about how people are going to move and work. So I think there's also this need for innovation districts to be involved in trying to shape the policy mix, you know, of the broader metropolitan region.
So in essence, A national economy cannot be globally competitive without a good number of these innovation districts located in large metropolitan areas. Is it a prerequisite to be a globally competitive, high-performing national economy in global competition?
I think it's a prerequisite to be a well-performing economy, that we have to be productive across all sectors and innovative across all sectors and be equitable. That doesn't mean equal, but it means that there's a the broad mass of population can gain some benefits from all this growth. And initiatives such as innovation districts, are kind of a part of this, and they help particularly in trying to focus on the city, and the revitalization of the city, which is a more sustainable way of moving forward. So I think it's part of the answer to your question, John, but I don't think it could be the complete answer because there are many other things that we need to do to be globally competitive.
Now, digitization doesn't seem to have saved us from the car culture. Why is that? In spite of the fact that we can work from home and conduct international conferences from distant remote facilities, we still see this preponderance of car parks. Is it that the workers of innovation districts in urban centers live outside and they want their cake and eat it? I'm looking at Annie here. He lives in Jones Creek.
Well, and of course, another challenge is the pandemic has made people a bit more reluctant to take public transit. In the cities, Atlanta has some public transit, but in the cities such as New York or London, which have really good systems, the ridership is built down. And it'll probably take some years to rebuild that back again. But you also see London is a good example of the development of these low emission zones and the tightening of constraints on driving into the city. It's basically going to become much more expensive. So there is a kind of a longer term effort to try and shift mobility into public transport. But I think we also have to think about where people live and work. And maybe the pandemic suggests to us that we need to rethink the suburb, and maybe there's a role for innovation hubs in suburbs, to kind of densify them so people can work closer to where they live and not have to drive an hour into the central city to find a decent job.
We had a presentation yesterday on the innovation district in the making at Peachtree Corners, where, for example, French Tech Atlanta chapter relocated, bringing in its wake several other relocations. So Atlanta is a huge metropolitan area. Do you think distance in having these multiple innovation districts could be a problem in the case of Atlanta, but other cities as well?
No, I think that there can and should be multiple, let's say, innovation places or hubs, and some of them may be districts, some may be science parks, et cetera, et cetera. So I think there's a variety of mechanisms. So I think having a number of them will be good. The challenge with a region, metropolitan region like Atlanta, is there's a danger that they're all in the northern part. City, and we know the city is a bit divided, and that the low income, less advantaged parts of the community tend to be in the south. From a regional perspective, the airport is really important, and ways in which we could leverage the airport to be more of innovation district as opposed to
yes,
innovation hub, which of course
yeah,
is successful at,
yeah,
could begin to shift some of this more a bit towards the southern part
yeah.
of the metro city region. But I think, yeah, there are opportunities for multiple initiatives and for people to talk to one another and not
Yes.
try and duplicate
Yeah.
and outcompete one another.
There was talk not recently in Atlanta of creating an innovation hub around the airport, an aerotropolis, I guess they called it. There's also talk about a second airport for Atlanta at some point when saturation is reached at Hartsfield. I think it's 120 million passengers, might be the threshold at which a second airport might be considered. I'd done an interview with the previous mayor who had indicated that based on his own experience. But
John, we
yes,
have a few questions in Q&A.
yes, we're going to turn to questions. We have 8 minutes left, so
Yeah.
let's go to the questions.
All
Annie,
right.
do you have a question you want to ask?
Yeah, I have a question to Professor Shapira. First of all, excellent presentation. And I have a question about, you mentioned there are about 80 or 90 innovation districts in the world. Would you please throw some light about innovation districts which are very focused on a technology or an industry, for example, biotech or fintech or cybersecurity? Number two, part B of that question, Professor Shapira, is that if one wants to develop an innovation district with a focus, what are the other aspects apart from the education and higher education, etc.?
So a couple of examples from the UK. You know, in London, there are some innovation districts, FinTech City, and the name gives it away. It's focused on the FinTech sector and with some success, and the number of unicorns in FinTech that have come out of London in the last few years has been pretty high. In Sheffield, which is in the north of England, which is a traditional industrial area, they have an advanced manufacturing innovation district, and they're focusing on advanced materials, graphene, advanced steels, etc. So I think there are opportunities and maybe needs to specialize. You know, just to be a generic district maybe doesn't mean anything. I think trying to develop some customization and things for which you can be recognized for, and I think that will reflect, you know, what are the strengths of the locality, of the university, of maybe some existing companies, or what's the potential for new things, you know, and where should you go strategically and try and focus. So I think, yeah, having a sector focus or a few sectors, you know, can make sense.
Right. And how would you differentiate in terms of existing generic innovation district versus something an innovation district of future? And let's say, let's say Atlanta in mind, or let's say RTI already has a lot of biotech focus and pharmaceutical focus. So if a government or a county or a city is interested in, let's say, cybersecurity, what would be the essential elements?
Maybe it's about doing an audit or an assessment. And I mean, I kind of gave a list of drivers. I mean, looking at research strengths and existing companies and finance and talent. So kind of going through and working out, you know, what's the stretch goal around this, you know. So I think there's probably a process that, innovation districts in planning can go through. But the innovation district of the future, I mean, I always thought that's an interesting kind of a phrase. Well, I'm thinking, well, it's got to be more sustainable and relevant. That was the whole point of my presentation. And the ones that can demonstrate that, I think, will get recognition. another variation, because as I look at how incubators have been, transitioned into accelerators and become more virtual, I'm sure we will begin to think of ways in which, how can we use virtual mechanisms and digital mechanisms in innovation districts. And then that kind of gets us back to this old question, well, do we still need what kind of face-to-face do we need? And what kind of digital connectivity do we need? And I think that that's probably going to be an area of exploration for innovation districts in the future.
Thank you. Thank you. So, John, we have 3 questions in Q&A. The first one is from Mr. Suresh Sharma.
Yeah, I can read them, Annie,
Okay.
just to save you some time.
Yes, please.
So, Suresh, thanks for your question. You said that, well, it typically takes 25 to 30 years to mature. How can we accelerate that? Well, maybe you look at others' examples and try and learn from it and customize. But somehow these things seem to take, a generation. It's particularly we're talking about changes in physical infrastructure and developing companies. They go through waves. I don't think innovation, of course, you can retrofit an innovation district and take a successful area and draw a line around that. But if you're trying to build something that is not really functioning at the moment, I think it's probably going to take a generation to do that. And I think having that long time perspective and patience is important. That's one message of Midtown Atlanta. The people involved in it, Georgia Tech and the other partners, have been working on this for 25 years, maybe more, and they're still working on it. So I think you have to have that long-term perspective. David, on your last question, will public transport will not soon recover? I mean, this is just from what I'm reading. And even personally, I am a very big user of public transportation. I was before the pandemic, and I haven't quite got back onto it yet. I've been on the odd tram ride, but I haven't kind of got back onto the bus. And I think many people, perhaps in my demographic, are kind of feeling the same. And I think the ridership figures are still down, although they've been going up a bit recently. It'll probably take a year or two for us to kind of get back to that level of density in public transit. And on the percentage of knowledge workers, I'm not quite sure. If you email me on that and kind of elaborate that question, I'll give you a full answer.
Great. Wonderful. Well, John, do you have any other closing questions?
No, I want to thank you, Phil, for an excellent presentation, which really threw a lot of light on questions that are very salient in Atlanta. And I know you are really a bicontinental colleague. So when you next visit, I look forward to having lunch with you to talk about innovation districts at greater length. Thank you again.